female celebrity mistook her neighbor for a stalker in the elevator. When the neighbor got on the elevator but didn't press a floor button, she couldn't help but ask him about it. The man glanced at her but remained silent. The female celebrity became even more convinced that he was a stalker. However, the man still didn't react. Charlotte sneered at him and then started to vent her frustration. After finishing her rant, she walked up to the man and offered him an autographed photo, asking him to leave immediately. The man sighed and walked out of the elevator as soon as the door opened. Faced with this embarrassing situation, tried to introduce herself as his new neighbor to ease the tension, but the man continued to stare coldly at her. Charlotte was extremely embarrassed. She quickly turned her head away. At this moment, the man opened the door without saying a word and closed it behind him. Charlotte was incredulous. She couldn't believe that in all of Korea there was someone who didn't recognize her. However, the seemingly naive young man was not just any ordinary person. His name was Steve. He was an alien from the KMT-184 planet 500 years ago. He accidentally arrived on Earth and fell in love with a human girl, but the girl died in his arms while trying to protect him in order to find his reincarnated love. Steve has stayed on Earth for over 500 years. Due to his unusual physiology, his organs are particularly sensitive. Even the sound of water dripping from a faucet can disrupt his sleep at night. On the night that Charlotte moved in, she was using on her first day of school, the female celebrity made a strange discovery. Her teacher turned out to be the straight male neighbor she mistook for a stalker. Last night and on the podium, Steve recognized Charlotte in the audience. He glared at her and caught the attention of his assistant, who quickly warned Charlotte not to offend Steve. Her ability to graduate early and leave the school would depend on Steve's evaluation of her performance. Charlotte was stunned and couldn't believe what she had heard. She remembered her behavior towards Steve last night and felt regretful. After class, she stopped Steve and apologized for her aggressive behavior. Last night she explained that she had a temper problem and asked if he could waive her after-class paper as she had a busy schedule. Steve stood up without a word and walked away. After work that evening, Steve found his only friend on Earth to say goodbye. He had just learned that this morning on his way to work, he saw a comet from their planet approaching Earth in 3 months. Having searched for his girlfriend fruitlessly for over a millennium, he decided to let go of the past and return to his planet to start a new life. What he didn't know was that 12 years ago he had actually encountered his girlfriend's reincarnation at the time. She was in danger, and Steve used his supernatural powers to stop time and save her. However, the girl was too young at the time and Steve did not recognize her identity. The next day, Charlotte asked her assistant to create a fake paper by compiling various sources from the internet. She was the first to submit her paper to Steve in front of the whole class, but Steve only glanced at it and recognized that her paper was entirely plagiarized. Charlotte tried to argue back, but Steve pointed out all the sources she had copied from and her methods of patching them together. Charlotte became the laughingstock of the class. After class, Steve noticed that the students were discussing the incident and planning to expose it online. Remembering Charlotte's sad expression a few days ago, he couldn't bear to see her suffer. He used his supernatural powers to destroy their phones and prevent the incident from spreading online. But the backlash had already begun, and Charlotte was once again the target of online bullying. Feeling frustrated, the female celebrity got appendicitis. Her first reaction wasn't to go to the hospital, but to sit in front of the makeup table and put on a delicate makeup. Then she endured the severe pain and picked out a pair of high heels from the shoe cabinet. As a top star, she firmly believed that even if she were in agony, she must not lose her grace. Steve next door heard the commotion and ran to the door to wait for her. He quickly lied and said he had to go to the hospital for something and then He used his own hands to determine the location of the inflammation and directly pointed out the treatment method to the nurse nearby. The nurse was shocked and asked who he was. Charlotte was afraid of being misunderstood, so she quickly lied and said Steve was her manager. The nurse immediately showed a displeased expression and Charlotte was pushed into the operating room while Steve sat in front of the door and waited for a whole night. When Charlotte returned to the ward, the nurse instructed him to take her for a walk until the gas in her stomach was released before she could be discharged from the hospital. Not long after, Charlotte hooked her arm around Steve's and strolled around the hospital constantly complaining about the loose hospital gown that couldn't highlight her well-proportioned figure. She also asked who Steve mistook her for on the rooftop yesterday. However, Steve did not respond to her words at this moment. An awkward scene suddenly happened. After taking Charlotte back to the ward, they suddenly found that it was snowing outside the window. At this moment, Steve suddenly remembered the promise his lover made to him years ago. Facing the snow, however, Charlotte in front of him started to complain about how eating fried chicken and drinking beer is the best way to enjoy a snowy day. She even started calculating the calories of various foods and asked if her weight would be a little lighter after having her appendix removed. Feeling speechless, he immediately ran to the sofa and started reading the newspaper. Later, he used the excuse of predicting the horoscope to warn Charlotte not to take a boat. Recently, he predicted that she would fall into the water while wearing a pair of silver high heels. However, Charlotte was too sleepy and didn't hear what Steve said at all. As the time for discharge approached and Charlotte had to attend her friend's wedding, she asked her manager to bring her high heels to the hospital. However, the manager told her that the shoes had been taken by Steve. Charlotte found Steve and asked him to return the shoes to her. However, Steve denied taking his shoes and got angry. Upon hearing that, Charlotte was annoyed and immediately sent someone to buy a new pair of the same shoes. She left a message for Steve about this. When Steve received the message, he found that the TV nearby was reporting that Charlotte had gone to the wedding on a cruise ship while wearing the silver high. A female celebrity came to attend her best friend's wedding, but she ran into her archenemy on site. The enemy mocked her for wearing the same high-heeled shoes as hers. Seeing that the two were about to quarrel, the bride hurriedly suggested taking a group photo together in an attempt to diffuse the tension. However, just as the photo was being taken, Patricia lifted her long legs to outdo Charlotte, who then took off her coat and exposed her bare shoulder to strike back. The two of them crazily posed in front of the camera, turning the supposedly beautiful wedding photo into a fashion. The bride was left embarrassed on the side. After the photo session, Charlotte went to the restroom to wash her hands. She heard a commotion outside and opened the door to find Patricia quarreling with Jacob's brother over a proposal. However, just before Charlotte arrived at the wedding, she had gossiped with Jacob's brother about his rumored relationship with Patricia, but he had denied it in front of everyone at the time. Soon it was time for the fireworks display. Charlotte's friend Tracy noticed that Charlotte had had too much to drink and went to look for her. However, just as Tracy was approaching her, the cruise ship suddenly tilted. Looked up again. Charlotte had disappeared. Tom quickly searched the cabin and found Charlotte sleeping on a gangway because she had drunk too much. However, the police began to investigate the incident because although Charlotte was found, Patricia's body was found in the Han River. Public opinion soon erupted and the public unanimously believed that Patricia's death must be related to Charlotte, with whom she had been at odds for a long time. When Charlotte, who had just woken up, already arrived at the entrance of the residential area, Charlotte tried to run away, but the elevator had already arrived. Just as she was at a loss, Steve suddenly opened the door and walked out. Charlotte immediately hid in Steve's apartment and told him about the incident. When she had bumped into Patricia and Tom's brother in the bathroom before getting drunk last night, she wanted him to help analyze whether Patricia's death was related to that incident. She then asked Steve if he had been to that place, but he said no because she had seen him on the deck last night. Steve blushed when he heard this because when he learned that Charlotte was in trouble that night, he told it directly to the cruise ship. After finding Charlotte drunk, he wanted to take her away, but the ship suddenly tilted just as Charlotte was about to fall into the water. Steve stopped time around them and saved her. However, just as he was about to leave, Charlotte reached out and hugged him. The female celebrity wanted to run away from home to avoid being surrounded by reporters. However, before she could even press the elevator button, she found that the reporters had already rushed up. She stood there at a loss when suddenly a neighbor opened his door. The female celebrity rushed into his apartment. The reporter soon swarmed into the building from the elevator and blocked Charlotte's door. Within a few seconds, Charlotte had no choice but to ask Steve to let her stay there temporarily. Steve didn't want to agree at first, but when he heard Charlotte's stomach growling with hunger, he kindly cooked a bowl of noodles for her. Only a few more people sleeping in his house, but he didn't expect that. In the early morning, he found his house turned into a mess by the dogs. Steve looked at Charlotte lying on the sofa without treating him as an outsider, and his face immediately darkened. However, Charlotte didn't take it seriously and even explained that the house had become more lively since she arrived. Angry, Steve grabbed her pillow and a fight broke out between them. Soon, Steve pinned Charlotte on the sofa. At this moment, Steve's friend who came to deliver food saw the scene and froze on the spot. Steve didn't want Charlotte to misunderstand so he called his friend Dad and invited them to have breakfast together. Charlotte thought that the man in front of her was Steve's father, so she pretended to be a virtuous wife and mother at the dining table. Steve's friend looked at the talented and beautiful couple in front of him. In the afternoon, Steve and his friend went to buy daily necessities for Charlotte. On the way back, he found that the poster of Charlotte on the street had been torn down. When they arrived home, they found that the reporters had left. However, when Charlotte asked about it, Steve lied and said that the reporters were still there. When Charlotte wanted to go to the balcony for some fresh air, Steve was afraid that she would be upset to see the torn poster, so he quickly stopped her and broke a vase with his power. He wanted Charlotte to clean it up, but she insisted on doing it herself. Just then, Charlotte's phone rang and she received some bad news. Her agent told her that Patricia's sister found out that Patricia had been diagnosed with depression before her death. Although the case was officially declared a suicide, the public believed that Patricia's suicide was indirectly related to Charlotte. The public opinion was against her and Charlotte. Charlotte realized that if she continued to hide, the public opinion against her might get worse as she didn't do anything wrong. However, just as she was about to leave, Steve grabbed her arm. She didn't notice that she had stepped on a piece of the broken vase because she was too anxious. Steve carried her to the pharmacy and then returned home to carefully treat her wound. Charlotte was touched by Steve's care and concern. After sending Charlotte home, Steve looked at the sofa where she had slept and felt a bit empty. Even during dinner, he couldn't help but think of the playful moments they had together. At home, he went to the balcony where the... Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more recaps on this channel. Subscribe for the next episode.